Greetings everyone, this is Umby here as per usual, and I know it's been a while since the last video where we were covering most of the VGC Draft League. I know we didn't get to see the finals, but the replays were released rather late, and at that point didn't feel like it was worth it. Everybody knew the result. But some news and some more news. For one, Season 3 of that Draft League is coming up soon, which I did register for, so hopefully I get to be a participant. There are limited slots, however, and if so, we can run it back from the last season, do replay reviews and team analysis, the same as last time, throughout the season, and hopefully this time get through the finals. We'll see. In addition to that, though, I have actually been hosting a draft league for the Georgia VGC community. We've just entered our playoff stage. We had 16 participants. They were split into 2 different groups of 8 each, and the top 4 seeds made it out into this final playoff stage here. Now they are matched opposite seeds, so seed number 1 versus seed number 4, seed number 2 versus seed number 3. So from group number 1, we have Nathaniel, Manny, Alex, and myself in order as the top 4 seeds, versus Purplepiglis, Bazuk, Chance, and Darius as those top 4 seeds in order. Wanted to make sure that both groups were paired off against the opposite group since they had played each other during the season. Don't want any repeat matchups just yet. That being said, though, let's go ahead and take a look and see how the matches actually played out. The first matchup we're going to take a look at is Nathaniel versus Darius, aka Esquire. On the top of your screen, Nathaniel with a very solid squad of Torkoal, Iron Hands, Farigiraf, Excalibur, Jumpluff, Mudsdale, Darkspun, Lilligant, Leafeon, Mischievous, and Squawkabilly. Now there's a reason that they're the number 1 seed in their group. I think they only have 1 loss to their record. And it's self-explanatory. Sunroom were no stranger to that. That pairing of Iron Hands and Farigiraf to set up the Trick Room almost very easily, because you can't fake out the Farigiraf from using Trick Room, and if they're holding a mental herb, can't taunt it from doing so either. Your only real routes are something like Imprison plus Trick Room there. Then you have the Torkoal. Once it's set under the Trick Room, perhaps from a Volt Switch from the Iron Hands lets it pivot in quite easily. It just wreaks havoc on the entire squad. Those very powerful eruptions under the sun, especially in the draft league, you may have some trouble defending against that. Now outside of Trick Room, though, they do have 3 chlorophyll users in Jumpluff, Lilligant, and Leafeon. Probably not going to see much play from the Leafeon, mainly looking at Jumpluff and Lilligant for those sleep powders. Normally, Jumpluff would be kind of a premier choice here because you could also get use of Tailwind. But the only one really benefiting from that Tailwind is going to be the Excalibur, if we're being honest. So I'm mainly looking at Lilligant as the prime chlorophyll user here, as it has the After You ability. So even if the Trick Room is not up, something like Torkoal next to Lilligant, you get the After You plus the Eruption, so the Torkoal is still moving ahead of everything else. They're also cool. There's a little bit of synergy with the Darkspun. If you have something like Lava Plume, you can boost its defense if you want to play a little bit more of a stally game. Same thing with like Mudsdale. You can use the stamina ability to help boost its defense, just to make them very hard to remove from the field and chip away at the opponent through the use of body presses. And then last but definitely not least that I want to touch on for this team is the Excalibur. Again, in a draft league setting, just in general, but in a draft league setting particularly, Excalibur ends up being a slept-on option for how much damage that it just generally outputs. Not a lot of Pokemon or squads are ready to take on a stabbed Glaive Rush from this monster, so it can just put out immense amounts of damage. Often the Terra types aren't really geared to take on the Excalibur, more so the rest of the team, so even neutrally, these Glaive Rushes end up hitting a lot of Pokemon on the opposite team just for free. So there are a ton of threats, all that's to say, on Nathaniel's team, just from the way that they've catered their lineup, so I think that's well done. On Darius's side, at first glance, it looks a little bit kind of all over the place. You don't see a lot of synergies between the mons outside of the obvious Abomasnow to Titan for that weather control and synergy with the Slush Rush, right? But they do have the core components of a standard team with their Fire, Water, Grass core through Iron Moth, Azumarill, and Abomasnow. Additionally, they did pick up the King Gambit, similar to like Excalibur. It's just a really solid pick. Very versatile into whatever team that you have because of the kind of damage that it outputs and the resistances from its typing. Honestly, just general overall bulk and power from its stats too. Also, one thing to consider is that since it is a draft league, there are limited amounts of steel types that you can pick up. Like obviously you have Goldingo and Gambit as the foremost ones that you think of. After that, it kind of drops off a little bit. You have things like Tinkaton and Magnezone. Klefki you do have for general utility, but as far as like pure defense or pure offense, your options are really limited, and you kind of do want to have them on your side for things like that Excalibur that we mentioned earlier. So I think that's going to be a key component for matching up against that Pokemon and in Trick Room in general, as long as it can survive the Torkoal somehow. You also have Iron Moth, which can take advantage of the sun that Torkoal will bring up there, doing massive amounts of damage to the entire team. Lilligant set threat, Jumpluff set threat, even Iron Hands. Well, very likely will be carrying an Assault Vest. It has general bulk. It's not going to be knocking out Iron Moth very quickly, while the boosted Fire moves from Iron Moth could pose a threat on the opposite end if they don't have a way to immediately remove it from the field. That's where something like Doxbun could come in, and to an extent, Excalibur, just hitting it with a fire move will raise its attack stat, which is also pretty threatening. Outside of all of that, the team's just catered to be really bulky, or as bulky as possible. Azumarill's high HP stat, King Gambit's big stats and typing are all very relevant to just providing some staying power and putting a lot of damage onto the field. As far as some of the little trickery that you can get into, you have Gothitelle, with normally it has the use of Fake Out, but it's going to be stopped by the Armor Tail from the Farigiraf. But you do have the use of Taunt, as long as mental herb's not in play, and Imprison Trick Room. If you just wanted to hard stop the Trick Room from ever occurring, that is also an option. Though you would need something like a Covert Cloak or Terra Ghost being committed on the Gothitelle just to stop the Iron Hands from faking out that option. Alternatively, if you think you can survive the following turn, you can just reverse the Trick Room as it happens and then stop it for the following turns, right? And last but not least, Houndstone may be something of mention here. While the Fluffy ability does put it at risk of taking unnecessary damage from the Torkoal, it could be a good way of slowing down the Iron Hands and the Excalibur, even Mudsdale, of course. Just naturally having big bulk and then boosting it through the Fluffy ability allows it to get some staying power, and then it can burn those physical options through the use of Will-O-Wisp. I did forget to mention Altaria. It does have Paris Song, so you can pair that with the Shadow Tag from the Gothitelle. All valid options, I believe, or at least things to be considered on the table. But let's see what these two players have chosen for their lineups as we get into the match itself. All right, on the bottom of your screen, you see Esquire, aka Darius. They've chosen Houndstone, Gothitelle, Iron Moth, King Gambit, Azumarill, and Abomasnow for their lineup. Meanwhile, you see Nathaniel with the very expected lineup: Farigiraf, Iron Hands, Torkoal, Doxbun, Lilligant, Excalibur. Nothing fancy here as we lead off the first game in playoffs round number 1. Gothitelle and King Gambit enter the field, facing down Farigiraf and Iron Hands. Pretty nasty matchup so far. King Gambit gonna protect, expecting something like a Drain Punch or Close Combat coming in, goes for the Fake Out. Meanwhile, Gothitelle with the Charm wants to slow that Iron Hands down from doing too much damage to the King Gambit just yet. Meanwhile, Farigiraf, as expected, goes for the Trick Room. King Gambit with the Fire Terror very early on. Meanwhile, Iron Hands going to opt for Swords Dance here, reversing that charm, but Gothitelle content just to keep charming it down, preventing it from doing too much damage. Kowtow Cleave from the King Gambit, aiming for that for a draft, hoping to get a quick knockout there. Meanwhile, following turn, Iron Hands goes for a Thunder Punch, not doing too much damage thanks to that Thunder Punch, but Farigiraf gets to use that Psychic to do additional damage to the King Gambit, but lowers its special defense and activates Defiant. That's going to guarantee a one-hit KO from the Kowtow Cleave no matter what happened there. The charm from the Gothitelle going to slow down the Iron Hands as Torkoal enters the field now. King Gambit with a Sucker Punch into the Torkoal. It's going to slow it down a little bit as it uses Earth Power to knock out the King Gambit, but Any eruptions coming later on are going to be at reduced power thanks to that big damage that it put out, but Gothitelle with the Psychic actually going to close out the KO onto the Torkoal. Meanwhile, Iron Hands, the damage is still gutted thanks to those 2 charms that Gothitelle got off earlier on. Darkspawn comes onto the field. One more turn of Trick Room left. They're staring down a Houndstone. Iron Hands with a Terrifier, hoping to prevent that Will-O-Wisp from burning here. Thunder Punch still not doing too much. Psychic, not doing too much just yet. Houndstone, though, content to yawn the Darkspawn, though. Darkspawn only able to stall right now. It's going to slow down the Gothitelle a little bit from doing too much damage as the Trick Room is reversing now, but nothing to the Houndstone, really. Darkspawn with the Play Rough, good damage into the Gothitelle, but still a ways to go. Houndstone with the Body Press to do some additional damage into the Iron Hands. I just want to go ahead and get that off the field. Another Psychic, going to activate the Citrus Berry. While Iron Hand's going to try and reverse these attack drops with another Sword Stance here, but Gothitelle is well set up to just go ahead and charm again as the Darkspawn falls asleep from that yawn from the previous turn. Another yawn from the Houndstone, trying to put the Iron Hands to sleep. Not going to go for anything burning here. Gothitelle is sufficient for lowering that attack stat through the charm. Another Thunder Punch from the Iron Hands, not going to get a paralysis or anything like that. Meanwhile, Gothitelle's going to escape the field in favor of Azumarill, going to save it for another day. But Darkspawn wakes up with a Play Rough. Houndstone with a Rain Dance, setting up this Azumarill to do major damage with something like a Waterfall or Aqua Jet here. See what happens as Iron Hands finally falls asleep from that yawn. Azumarill with a Protect. Correctly does so as it scouts out the Play Rough from the Darkspawn. Houndstone going to yawn the Darkspawn one more time. Hopefully it stays asleep for another turn. Or another turn from the last time, that is. Houndstone with a Shadow Sneak, getting some chip damage in. As Azumarill goes for the Aqua Jet into the Terrifier, Iron Hand still not doing a ton of damage, even under the rain, surprisingly enough. Another Play Rough from the Darkspawn goes into the Azumarill, doing some pretty decent damage. 28 is nothing to sneeze at here. Another Aqua Jet, bringing Iron Hands down low, but not KOing it quite yet. Both Pokemon still asleep here. And Houndstone's going to finish off the KO onto the Iron Hands. Only a sleeping Darkspawn left against Darius's almost full squad. Gothitelle, Azumarill, and Houndstone still left. I'm just going to keep chipping away until we can take it down. Azumarill with the Play Rough, Shadow Sneak from the Houndstone to bring it down below 40. Writing's on the wall for this matchup, I believe, unless Darkspawn has a way to recover all that health here. Another Shadow Sneak, another Play Rough, not enough to grab the KO. And Shadow Sneak finally does it on this final turn here. Esquire's up 1 game. Moving on to game number 2. Okay, we're going to see Gothitelle and Azumarill here this time. And Torkoal Lilligant immediately here for Nathaniel's side. Just going to want to opt for like a really quick Sun mode here. Not opting for the Trick Room. It was too much trouble to set up last time, and Gothitelle slowed down the Iron Hands way too much here. All right, and we see the Lilligant going for the Sleep Powder, but Sap Sipper is the option for Azumarill, stopping that Sleep Powder right in its tracks. And while Gothitelle sets up the Trick Room on its own, turning Nathaniel's own strategy against them. Torkoal with the Lava Plume here, expecting that they might have taken too much damage perhaps to use Eruption, but not going to do too much. Lilligant does protect, preventing damage from the Lava Plume here. Play Rough from the Torkoal. Play Rough from the Azumarill into Lilligant, doesn't find it thanks to that Protect. Bring the Torkoal with the Lava Plume, hits the Lilligant, brings it down low here. Azumarill going to finish that off with a Play Rough. Keep in mind, it did use Belly Drum previously. That's why we see it didn't do too much damage in the previous game. Sap Sipper rather than huge power here. They're set up for success. All right, but Iron Hands comes in under the Trick Room, opts for the Fake Out, as the Torkoal opts for Earth Power, trying to finish off that Azumarill really quickly. Azumarill's going to protect, though, as we go into the final turn of Trick Room. Terrifier from the Iron Hands. Another Earth Power from the Torkoal doesn't quite finish off the Azumarill. Azumarill gets a Play Rough off, but not too much damage thanks to that Terrifier. Does 40%, very respectable, but Iron Hands lives to use Thunder Punch against the Azumarill and KO it. Gothitelle, we saw the previous game, another Charm, slowing down that Iron Hands, and it can't retreat out to reset that stat drop. Houndstone with the Yawn going into the Iron Hands, again trying to slow it down. We're outside of Trick Room now, so Gothitelle moves ahead of the Torkoal, KOs it with the Psychic. Meanwhile, Iron Hands with the Thunder Punch not doing too much damage thanks to that Charm. Gets a paralysis for its troubles though. Icicle Spear from the Bat's Caliber on the following turn as it just comes in, finally finishes off that Gothitelle. but Houndstone with the Yawn gonna make Excalibur sleepy. Two Pokemon only on the field, so no way to swap out the stat drops or the drowsiness here. Looks like Nathaniel's in trouble as Kingambit comes in and Terra Fires. Stomping Tantrum, super effective versus the Kingambit still, regardless of that Terra there, but still above 50% health. Body Press from the Houndstone into the Iron Hands. They want to get that off the field, so there's no threat of any swords dancing or any recovery from Drain Punch if they have that. Citrus Berry does activate though, keeping it alive. That Excalibur does fall asleep thanks to that Yawn. Houndstone, another Body Press into Iron Hands, bringing it down low. Kowtow Cleave, gonna finish the job. It's a 2v1. Houndstone Kingambit versus a sleeping Bat Excalibur. Does not wake up this turn. Houndstone with the Body Press doing major damage after a critical hit. And Iron Head from the Kingambit gonna finish it off with a 2-tap. That was a game. Congrats to Esquire. That matchup looked pretty weird because there's so many routes that Nathaniel could go with the Trick Room or with the Sun mode, but Esquire sufficiently prepared after getting the advantage with game 1, able to trip up Nathaniel even further thanks to that Sap Sipper Azumarill and getting to set up the Belly Drum under Trick Room, just turning the whole game on its head. It's like Esquire was able to just stifle all of Nathaniel's efforts and just keep them slow throughout the entirety of the match. Well played and good preparation to them. The next matchup we'll look at is Manny versus Chance, and if you thought this was a weird amalgamation of Pokemon for either lineup, you would probably be correct. Just starting from Manny's side with Arcanine, Goldingo, Dragonite, Abomasnow, Gastrodon, Colossal, Sneasel, Brute Bonnet, Ampharos, Girafarig, and Dugtrio. Nothing really as far as synergy stands out, or direct synergy rather, outside of the Sneasel Colossal. We're no strangers to the surf strategies plus weakness policy. The only difference is this is not the Sword and Shield format anymore, so there's no access to Dynamax to mitigate the damage from the surf, nor is there Gmax Volcalith to make it just a living hell for the opponent, right? So the superstars here are actually on the front end of this team: the Arcanine, Goldingo, and Dragonite. Arcanine providing some generic utility and flexibility across the board. Intimidate can't be understated as a nice defensive utility, nor can Snarl and Will-O-Wisp, but also it can be it's a really solid physical attacker. Outside of that, with the use of Flare Blitz and Extreme Speed, and even tech options like Wild Charge or Crunch or Close Combat where needed, right? Goldingo, we talked a little bit about how there are limited amounts of steel types available to select in this draft format. So I think here Manny picked up what is very likely the best one to just settle on, and it's an offensive powerhouse as well. So as long as you give it a good amount of support, it'll provide a lot of pressure to put on the opposing team, which then allows it to be softened up for Arcanine or Dragonite to finish things off with Extreme Speed, for example. Speaking of Dragonite, again, another powerhouse for the team. Is just done really well in these early Scarlet and Violet formats, just as a standalone attacker, and then it's still pretty bulky. The Dragon Flying type allows it to get some pretty relevant resistances and turning some resistances or weaknesses rather neutral. Paired with the multi-scale where allowed can make it a difficulty from removing from the field, which you kind of want to do as soon as possible because it does a ton of damage. Outside of that, you do have the Gastrodon and the Brute Bonnet providing some defensive utility, and paired with the Arcanine make for a pretty solid Fire, Water, Grass core. Gastrodon with the Storm Drain, I think, has been a valuable utility in certain matchups, and also a good rock resistance is also understated. Again, reverting back to the steel discussion, steel is one of the things that helps to resist things like the Tyranitar on this team. Only here, the Goldingo is weak to the Crunch, so here's where Gastrodon comes in and takes it neutral while resisting the Rock Slide as well. Sitting it in front of these big threats while just pressuring things with Yawn, and even a potential recover is very valuable for the game state. And then you have Brute Bonnet with things like Spore and Rage Powder as really solid utilities, and even things like Crunch and Bullet Seed to go on offense. So from there, that's where we kind of see the game plan come together. You have these big, bulky threats, not necessarily getting any speed advantage through like Tailwind or Trick Room, but just able to soak up a hit and output their own damage, or put the opponent under threat of their own offense being stifled, just preventing them from playing the game the way that they want to. You have to kind of see all those individual pieces, then put them together to see where this one's going. And then, you know what, we'll talk about Ampharos and Girafarig as well. Ampharos, I think it's understated having electric type on your team in this draft format. And Ampharos as a bulky option fits with the theme that Manny's going for here, but it's also one of the few options for Electro Web. So that missing speed control that I was talking about before, it can help provide that, as well as if you want to, something like screens, for example. Girafarig can't be understated as a potential Trick Room option, or an option to go into an opposing Trick Room matchup with its ability to use both Imprison and Trick Room, or if you just want to take advantage of Trick Room itself, use the Trick Room from there. All right, now we talked a lot about that, but on Chance's side, this is where things get a little bit weird, but their replays have actually helped me. I have taken a look at theirs before this analysis here, but Tyranitar, Iron Jugulis, Sableye, Gothorita, Hippowdon, Ursaring, Gallade, Brambleghast, Jolteon, Haxorus, and Umbreon. So immediately, Tyranitar, in a similar scope of Dragonite, but not quite there. Very strong as a standalone Pokemon and very difficult to remove thanks to its general bulk and the Sandstream pairing with its rock typing to make it even bulkier on the special side. From there, you have things like Iron Jugulis and Sableye supporting it. Iron Jugulis we have to talk about alongside the Brambleghast, because Iron Jugulis can use the booster energy, of course, to get the speed advantage over the entire team and use Tailwind. Meanwhile, Brambleghast can actually use its Wind Rider ability to make it a potential offensive threat. It's only got base 115 attack, which isn't terribly high, but with the Wind Rider ability, if it's hit by a wind move, or if a Tailwind gets started, it actually gets a +1 to its attack stat. So just off the bat, it can become this really strong offensive ghost type with things like Phantom Force to break past any substitutes or protect. So if you're not careful, it can actually run away with the game. But as a grass type, it also has access to some weird things like Leech Seed, for example, or the more threatening Sap Sipper. Not Sap. Why can't I find the Strength Sap? There we go. That Azumarill from the previous game has me a little bit pilled, but Strength Sap is also really annoying, especially under Tailwind. So any health that it may have lost, it gets to recover that back while stifling the opponent's offense. Under Tailwind makes it a terror to try and remove from the field, despite its lower defensive stats. Now you also have things like Sableye and Gothorita as these really strange utilities that are hard to account for. So like the Sableye, we know that it has access to things like the Will-O-Wisp, like Rain Dance, like Sunny Day. But it has a ton of utility, and it's hard to kind of scout out what it really wants to do to put your team down. Gothorita, additionally, through the Shadow Tag, if you can scout out a good matchup, things like Guts, Flame Orb, Ursaring, or Gallade can actually do a ton of damage early on to some of your critical mons that are trying to lead off for you if you're not careful. The plan overall seems like we're just using some scattered, heavily offensive mons, and we're trying to kind of like force the matchup a little bit in our favor with the Brambleghast using something like Strength Sap, getting the Tailwind advantage through the Iron Jugulis, and kind of praying from there from success. I'm kind of keeping my eye on Tyranitar and Gallade. Gallade in particular, just through having a bunch of slicing moves. If you pair it with the Scope Lens, it could be a big threat towards different matchups. You have things like Aqua Cutter, you have Leaf Blade, you have Night Slash, and then you don't see it on your screen, but also it has the sharpness ability, increasing the power of those moves. So I'm keeping my eye on that one for doing a big lift of the damage for this particular team. It's been successful, so we'll have to see how the matchup plays out here. All right, on the bottom of your screen, Manny has opted for Brute Bonnet, Gastrodon, Goldingo, Ampharos, Arcanine, and Dragonite. Meanwhile, Chance has opted for Sableye, Tyranitar, Haxorus, Iron Jugulis, Brambleghast, and Gallade. All the pieces that we've talked about and had the most priority just from the perspective of the matchup have shown up to the party. Goldingo and Brute Bonnet are going to lead for Manny here. Meanwhile, for Chance, they are going straight into the Iron Jugulis and Brambleghast. We do see the booster energy coming out immediately here. Goldingo going to immediately Terra Steel as the Jugulis activates Tailwind. Again, that's going to increase Brambleghast's attack here. It's going to use Substitute to start things off, helping to attack behind the Substitute. All right, the Make It Rain is going to come out and do quite a bit of damage to the Iron Jugulis as it goes to sleep from the Spore as well. Make It Rain breaks the Substitute from the Brambleghast at the same time. Turn 2, Brambleghast with the Phantom Forest coming out. Make It Rain is going to, of course, miss and take down the Iron Jugulis here. We can see what Brute Bonnet's going to do is opting for the Crunch to keep the Brambleghast honest, make sure it doesn't set up another sub here. Meanwhile, Haxorus makes its way onto the field. Goldingo is going to make a hasty retreat into the Arcanine, trying to intimidate the Haxorus, but finds the clear amulet. So Haxorus at full strength right now. Brambleghast with the Phantom Force doing 47 respectable versus the Arcanine here, as the Haxorus uses X-Scissor to immediately remove Brute Bonnet from the field. Dragonite's going to take its place, put out some damage through the Extreme Speed, while the Strength Sap comes out from the Brambleghast, lowering Arcanine's physical attack. Dragon Claw from the Haxorus, super effective. Looking like we went inner focus on the Dragonite here. Multiscale, I think it might have survived here. Meanwhile, Arcanine with the Play Rough gets a critical hit to land on the Haxorus and removes it from the field. Gallade's going to take its spot and stares down the Goldingo that enters one more time, as the Tailwind did fall off a couple turns ago. Arcanine with an Extreme Speed do some damage over to the Gallade, hoping to find that Focus Sash just in case. And the Goldingo revealing that it has a Choice Scarf actually. Uses Make It Rain to remove both Pokemon off the field before any further damage can be done, and wins the game, moving us on to game number 2. Alright, and Goldingo makes a return visit to the field alongside that Brute Bonnet from game 1. No need to mix things up here. Meanwhile, from Chance's side, Gallade and Haxorus to try and get a strong offense started here. Alright, Terra Fairy from the Brute Bonnet, though, being very wary of that X-Scissor from the last game. Goldingo gonna go for a Make It Rain here. It's a huge chunk of damage onto the Haxorus. Brute Bonnet with the Rage Powder, but unfortunately Haxorus uses Earthquake as the Gallade protects. Does a fair bit of damage to the Goldingo here. It's a little bit on life support. And Jugulis comes in place of the Haxorus as the Gallade Terra Grasses here. Gonna avoid that Rage Powder this time as a result. Another Make It Rain from the Goldingo, doing some chip damage here. As the Leaf Blade comes out from the Gallade into the Brute Bonnet. Now Terra Fairy no longer resisting it here, but still staying alive thanks to the Citrus Berry in our immense bulk. Goldingo gets to survive another day though, as the Dragonite comes in. Looks like Gallade tried to call out an Arcanine switch, hoping to reduce that attack power, but finds the Gallade with the Aqua Cutter instead. Dragonite with the Extreme Speed to do some more damage to the Iron Jugulis as it sets up Tailwind for the first time in this game. Gallade with the Leaf Blade gonna finish off the Brute Bonnet, however. Arcanine does come in this time, lowering Gallade's attack power here, but the Extreme Speed from Arcanine into Iron Jugulis finishes it off. And Dragonite opts for an Extreme Speed on its own, brings Gallade down pretty low, but not quite finding the KO here. Meanwhile, Gallade with the Aqua Cutter doing some respectable damage to Arcanine, but even super effective, not enough to get anywhere close to a KO. It's all left to Tyranitar here to try and salvage the game here. A quick Extreme Speed is hoping to seal Gallade's fate. Not going to get it just yet, as the Tyranitar uses Rock Slide to finish off the Arcanine. Meanwhile, Dragonite with the Brick Break into the Tyranitar brings it low, but activates as a weakness policy. There is one more turn of Tailwind after this, so if Tyranitar is fast enough, could get out a pretty beefy attack, but Dragonite opts for the Extreme Speed to finish off the Gallade, and the Goldingo with its Scarf, of course, just compared to Tyranitar's lower speed stat, is going to get ahead of it and close out the kill, close out the game, close out this set. Manny is going to go ahead and move on to our semifinals in a convincing 2-0. For our third match in our round 1 of playoffs, we have Alex versus Bazuk. Alex at the top of your screen with Great Tusk, Tyranitar, Corviknight, Gyarados, Gengar, Indeedee, Pachirisu, Zoroark, Palossand, Magneton, and Primate. And on the front end of this, we got a respectable core through the Great Tusk, Tyranitar, and Corviknight. All three Pokemon thrive under sand, so no sweat there. You get some chip damage on the opposing team, kind of chip away with them with the Corviknight, or put out immense pressure through the sheer strength of the Great Tusk and Tyranitar. To kind of round things out though, because these Pokemon are weak to, or the Tyranitar rather, is weak to fighting, and the Great Tusk is weak to water, Gyarados I think is pretty solid addition into the team to handle certain matchups where they could fall. But sharing the electric weakness with the Corviknight, that's where the Pachirisu is a solid option, and even Magneton as a lower tiered option pairs pretty well with those two Pokemon to just to cover defensively, right? Meanwhile, Gengar adds a little bit of a special punch to the team, which it's otherwise missing, or rather, through having to use Zoroark or Magneton, it can be pretty difficult to apply special pressure onto the opposing team. So Gengar, also I think a pretty solid pickup, and pairs well with the Corviknight and the Gyarados too. With it being weak to ground and both of those Pokemon being immune to it, it gives it some viable switch-ins to go into, shift things around here. Not too much to really say about the squad. This is one that I faced down in the regular season as I substituted in, and fell short of trying to grab a win. So I can attest that it is a little bit hard to break through with this lineup if you don't have the right pieces. And again, this is a draft league, so your Pokemon selections at the start of the draft make all the difference in each particular matchup. Yeah, I think this one is set for at least some solid synergy between Mons that you can kind of just like better player the other teams, or attempt to do so. Bazuk though, on the opposite end with Iron Hands and Goldingo, Sylveon, Hydreigon, Grafaiai, Floatzel, Scovillain, Slaking, Frostmoth, Donphan, and Knucklestack. Now, I'll be honest, most of the team, there's not too much that you really want to talk about here. But I do want to point at the Hydreigon Goldingo, reminiscent of the very combination Series 1 combination, just with their, I believe, perfect type coverage between the two. Ghost and Steel plus Dark and Dragon. Just really solid coverage across the board. And then when you pair that with Sylveon, you have this really cool Steel Fairy Dragon core that can cover a lot of matchups both offensively and defensively. Iron Hands, very generic pickup as far as Paradox Pokemon goes, very flexible, so it just kind of adds into the defensive bulk of the team, help cover some matchups from that end as well. Also adds a big physical punch, which otherwise that those three Pokemon are missing out on. Goldingo, Sylveon, Hydreigon, very special focus, so Iron Hands adding some much needed physical presence on the team is also pretty welcome too. Outside of that, you do have a little bit of cheekiness. You got the Grafaiai and the Slaking. Grafaiai, of course, using its special attack, the Doodle, to remove the Truant from Slaking. That way it can kind of attack freely, not have to wait between turns, and with a base 160 attack stat, it's pretty strong, so there's incentive to fly off the handle with that particular combo, but it's also pretty tough to pull off, even with something like Prankster Doodle. Right? Then last but not least, just in particular to this matchup, we can talk a little bit about Donphan and Knucklestack. Donphan being the lesser Tusk, being able to match up into the Tyranitar and Pachirisu may be a welcome presence for the team if Bazuk sees fit. And also Knucklestack, if they're unable to break the Corviknight, and that just depends on what type of terror that they go into, which I think you can cover pretty much anything that goes into, is a way of just chipping down with it through the use of Salt Cure, if you opt for that. So a lot of options from both sides, and honestly very straightforward. There's not a lot of trickery, and there's not a lot of combinations, like your Swift Swimmers or your Chlorophyll users, right? I think it's honestly just a straight up better player comes out on top type of deal. So let's take a look and see who is the better player here. All right, we have Alex with Great Tusk, Magneton, Corviknight, Gengar, Palisand. Interestingly enough, we didn't touch on that one, and Tyranitar. And then Bazuk has opted for Iron Hands, Goldingo, Hydreigon, Sylveon, Knucklestack, and Grafaiai. All right, leading off the battle for us on Alex's side of the field is Gengar and Great Tusk. They're gonna be facing down Iron Hands and Hydreigon. Gengar with a Terra Fairy to lead us off here. Great Tusk with the Protect, trying to scout out the fake out perhaps. Yep, and there it is from the Iron Hands into the Great Tusk slot. Gengar with a Dazzling Gleam, making quick work of Hydreigon and doing a ton of damage to Iron Hands. Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam brings down to below 50% health. That's pretty crucial. Sylveon comes in and takes Hydreigon's place. Terra Fairies immediately. Another Dazzling Gleam from the faster Gengar finishes off the Iron Hands. Leaves Sylveon on its own. Immune to the Headlong Rush, crucially enough, though. That allows it to get off Hyper Voice, doing a pretty good chunk of damage to the Gengar here, and also bringing down the Great Tusk to Sash range here. But crucially, though, the Cursed Body disables the Hyper Voice from the Sylveon here, so they're short an offensive tool. Great Tusk, though, hanging on, manages to use Knockoff, wipes the Goldingo off the field after another Gengar Dazzling Gleam, a quick 1-2 combo. Sylveon forced a Shadow Ball, the Great Tusk cleared off the field, but is on life alert right now. And another Dazzling Gleam from the Gengar, gonna finish off the game. Very quick work from an unsuspected option from the start of the game, over in 4 turns. You expected Sylveon to be the AoE Fairymon hitting everything and blasting things, but it was Gengar all along. Game 2, a lot of ground for Bazuk to make up for. We're going to switch sides here to keep things equal to the last game. But we do see them leading off with the Hydreigon and Sylveon this time. Meanwhile, Alex with the Gengar and Tyranitar coming out. All right, Terra Poison from Hydreigon this time. Not taking any chances from that Dazzling Gleam from last time. Tyranitar with the Protect. Want to scout out that Hyper Voice, I expect. Gengar with those opts for Icy Wind. It's going to slow down the Hydreigon, not the Sylveon though, as it did use a Protect. Hydreigon gets an opportunity to set the Tailwind this time though. Tyranitar is going to Terra Poison itself as the Hydreigon Dark Pulses the Gengar into Oblivion. Waiting on Sylveon, who uses the Shadow Ball into the Tyranitar, not going to be effective. Tyranitar, Rock Slide. Pretty hefty damage to both targets here, and with the Sandstorm chip, both Pokemon are below 50% health, could be in trouble. Palisand coming in. Hydreigon uses a Dark Pulse into the Tyranitar, not enough to get a knockout of course, and recovers a bit thanks to that Citrus Berry. Sylveon with the Hyper Voice. Tries to double up there to get the K on the Tyranitar, but nothing doing thanks to that recovery. Activates the Throat Spray, but goes down to the Iron Head from the Tyranitar though. Palisand living here above 50% health, using Shadow Ball to clear out the Hydreigon. We have Palisand and Tyranitar facing down Iron Hands and Goldingo here. Goldingo with a Make It Rain and a KO both Pokemon on the field. Tyranitar and Palisand are down for the count. We're down to a 1v2. And Tailwind has finally cleared the field for Bazuk. It's down to Great Tusk and its Headlong Rush, which with a critical hit, KOs the Iron Hands. Not sure if it would have mattered though. And we know it has a Focus Sash, so even if the Make It Rain were to KO here, Great Tusk gets to live for one more turn. Alex was able to preserve that into the very end. That might make the difference here as he used Headlong Rush, clearing Goldingo off of the field. It was a close call, but not really, because Great Tusk was actually 2 Pokemon all along thanks to that Focus Sash. Good game indeed, good preparation from Alex. Just running away with the first game as convincingly as they did, give them a lot of breathing room to kind of refocus their efforts on the second game and stop any efforts from Bazuk to grab the win here. But reserving that Focus Sash for so long made such a huge difference. I think that was a very well played. Congrats. For the final matchup of this round, it is myself versus Purplepiglis. So now some context. Originally, I was not part of the actual competition. I was just mainly hosting it. But we only had 16 entrants and 1 player had to drop. So I filled in at the very end of the season, only played the final 2 rounds, managed to get a win, managed to get a loss, and it barely squeaked me into the 4th seed of my group. So, and the team did have many of the components that I would have chosen for this particular draft league. I did have to switch some out. So what you see on your screen, Fluttermane, Pelipper, Palafin, Kingambit, Noivern, Serena, Donphan, Rotomfan, Espeon, Flareon, and Pikachu. So just keep in mind, this team already had Fluttermane, Pelipper, Palafin, and Serena. These are all things that I'm most interested in. Palafin and Serena are some of my favorite Pokemon. Want to use them on a rain squad. Just had the benefit that Fluttermane was also part of the selection as well. Originally, Salamence was there instead of Noivern, but had to swap some things out to make room for Kingambit. Again, I've talked about this multiple times throughout this video, but steel types are limited, and for whatever reason, Kingambit was still on the list available to be selected, and I wanted to make sure that it was part of the squad. So where that would normally be a Salamence there, got Kingambit, and Noivern is taking the place as the resident dragon slash Tailwind user. Right. From there, I did swap in a Rotom fan just so I had an Electric Mon to attack with. I think that's really crucial to have. Flareon, lower tier pick, but I still wanted to make sure that I did have some additional fire resistance, just mainly in matchups where like water is just not enough, right? And then Pikachu is mainly just as a way to have a faux redirector for electric moves going into Pelipper or Palafin, as well as a fake out user, which is also one thing that the team was missing. But we've seen the rain squad before. Typically, you're trying to get Palafin in, set it up under the Tailwind for the later turns. This team also has the flexibility, though, of kind of relying on Fluttermane and Kingambit for a lot of its damage as well. So there are many routes that you can go there. Serena, I think, also is a pretty solid option in draft leagues. So you can stop out a lot of the priority moves like Fake Out and Extreme Speed that are like highly valuable and sought after when kind of creating your draft. So having that as the Resident Grassmon under the effects of rain is just really solid to have. Noivern has some synergy with the Fluttermane. You can use like Terra Normal, Boom Burst, and Fluttermane is not affected. So even some cheeky strategies like Boom Burst, Terra Normal, with Choice Specs, Fluttermane using Dazzling Gleam, can kind of clear out a lot of Pokemon off the field unless they're Steel type, right? But even then, Noivern has a Heat Wave as long as rain is not no effect. So a lot of different angles you can approach each matchup for through this squad, which is what I was aiming for. A rain squad with Palafin with some flexibility that can kind of reactively work around different matchups. Meanwhile, Purplepiglis, opting for Iron Bundle, Dragonite, Mousehole, Bisharp, Jumpluff, Primate, Gyarados, Gengar, Gudra, Palossand, and Girafarig. All pretty solid options, or pretty good options across the board. Iron Bundle, I'm hoping no one slept on this option because it's just it has a really large presence in the game, being like the fastest option that you could select from any Pokemon or any Paradox Pokemon. Well, no, I lied. There is Dragapult, but of the typical options that you see, it's going to be the fastest thing on the board, and I don't think anyone picked Dragapult, so it's free and clear from there. Even if it did, you have booster energy to boost its speed, so I will effectively say is the fastest mon that you can select that is relevant to this particular metagame. But also just incredibly strong as well through its massive Hydro Pumps and Freeze Dry, which is something that my squad has to very much watch out for. The Freeze Dry is to destroy Pelipper and Palafin, and if I do decide to set up Rain, I'm only boosting the power of its own Hydro Pumps, which is really scary. Dragonite, we've talked a lot about that, no surprise here. Also does pretty well into the rain squad, resisting any water type moves, and doesn't really fall to the Hurricane from Pelipper. I'm forced to kind of rely on something like Ice Punch from Palafin, or Ice Beam from Pelipper, I hesitate to say. But Fluttermane does match up pretty decently into it, being immune to both extreme speed and low kick, and also if it does want to use a dragon move, being immune to that. Only thing I'd have to watch out for is something like a Terra Blast Flying, which if I'm not playing like a bulky type of Flutter main, could go down pretty quickly. You also see some other cool things like mouse hold next to the Primeape for kind of like a faux mouse plus annihilate combo, which still works pretty well, especially since Terra is an option for either Pokemon to take advantage of, and especially since Primeape still does have a Rage Fist, even if it isn't naturally stabbed. Once you get the bulk ups off, paired next to the Friend Guard from Mousehold, it's still kind of a menace to remove from the team. Drain Punch still stabs, still does a ton of damage after the bulk ups. It all works the same thing, trust. From there, you do also have Bisharp. Again, you're short on steel types. Outside of if you wanted King Gambit but couldn't get it, Bisharp's your next best option. Jumpluff, fast sleep powders. What can I say? Gyarados, in a similar vein to Arcanine, provides this kind of bulky answer to certain matchups and provides the intimidate pressure to kind of stifle physical offense, especially valuable into my team since Palafin is expected to be a star, but also has to watch out for Defiant from the King Gambit that I did pick up. Very crucial that they choose whether they want Intimidate or Moxie, or if they want to run Intimidate, they need to be able to cover the King Gambit very sufficiently with their other Pokemon, which they got Primeape and Dragonite, so is definitely possible to do. Gengar naturally is, I think a little bit of a dark horse in a draft format. Puts out a massive amount of special attack damage onto unsuspecting teams. So, especially with a Focus Sash, you could really run away with the game. And then the only other one that I really want to touch on is the Goodra in particular to this matchup, because that is hard for this team to cover as well. The usual Terra for like water Pokemon, or in this case Pelipper and Palafin, if we're trying to be defensive, is usually like a grass type, especially if we're trying to avoid something like Sleep Powder from Jumpluff, and then perhaps using even Terra Blast to try and dispatch the bundle as quickly as possible. However, Goodra makes that difficult because it has access to that Sap Sipper ability, effectively nullifying any grass moves. Even if it wants to go like Terra Water, so that it's not weak to like any ice moves, but still resists the water moves that I'm trying to throw out. Now it gets to absorb any grass move that would normally come in and affect the water type. It's really tricky to get around here. I'd have to rely on some type of electric attack, which is tough considering that Rotom Fan doesn't look the best into this matchup, and then Pikachu's not really outputting a lot of damage. It's not terribly fast either. So if this mon enters the field, I'm a little bit stifled. Kind of have to rely on something like Flutter Mane, doing a lot of damage with Dazzling Gleam. Hope the Terra is gone so we can actually hit the Goodra, but its special defense stat makes it harder to break through. In which case, I have to rely on things like King Gambit hitting neutrally into it and taking advantage of its lower defense stat while watching out for Body Press, or Serena, who gets access to something like Play Rough, taking advantage of Goodra's Dragon typing and lower defensive stat as well. So yeah, that's the way that I looked at the matchup. I thought it was like kind of tough going into, because they have a lot of ways to react to what my team wants to do. But I think I'd fleshed out a solid plan to be able to at least handle it, not make it look like a wash, and go into it. So here is how it plays out. All right, we're going to view things from my perspective here. So you can see that I'm leading Pelipper, Palafin, Serena, King Gambit, Pikachu, and Flutter Mane. Meanwhile, Purplepiglis has opted for Iron Bundle, Dragonite, Jumpluff, Primeape, Gyarados, and Gengar. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and give a little bit of a spoiler. I had a plan here, and you can see what it might be. However, I forgot to use a crucial Terra early on to the game. So we see the Shadow Ball going to the Gengar. The Flutter Mane survives it. I made it very bulky. I was supposed to Terra Fairy the King Gambit here and use Sword Stance as Flutter Mane sets up the Trick Room here. So they get a free KO while I have to kind of scramble back into the game and see what I can do here. Dragonite retreats from in favor of Iron Bundle, while the Pelipper uses Chilling Water into the Gengar slot. Just in case there's a sash there, we're doubling up with the Shadow Ball into it. The Flutter Mane is very slow here, so I was able to underspeed Gengar under this Trick Room setting and get the KO. Dragonite comes back in, another Chilling Water from the Pelipper. Trying to lower the Dragonite's attack, prevent it from doing too much here, but Dragonite, still slower than Fluttermane, gets to move ahead of it, use Ice Spinner to clear it off the field. I don't have Protect in this version, I really wanted it at this point. Freeze Dry though, from the Iron Bundle, clears my Pelipper off of the field. Still a few turns of Trick Room left, so I have to see what I can do with a lone Serena versus 3 Pokemon here. Start by using Terra Fairy and Bullet Seed into the Iron Bundle in case that has Sash. We haven't scoped it out yet, so if it did have Sash, we got past it with the Bullet Seed, pick up a free KO. We're still under Trick Room, but we've got a long way to go here. Dragonite comes back onto the field. As the Primeape tears into water, I go for a play rough, hoping for the KO since I broke Multi-Scale, which we expected here, but it's not enough for a KO, even with Terra Fairy. They get a free Ice Spinner here, which is doing some pretty chunky damage, even at 50%, so we can expect it as a choice belt here, but Primeape gets a crucial bulk up here. Now that Trick Room's over, gets another bulk up ahead of Serena attacking. I get to Bullet Seed the Dragonite to finally clear it off the field, but knowing that I am slower than the Primeape, even if I get lucky with these Bullet Seeds versus the Terra Water, the writing's on the wall here. So the Rage Fist does come out, finishes off the Serena, but I managed to make it very close despite being at a bit of a disadvantage thanks to that slip up in turn 1. Game number 2 though. Let's take a look as Jumpluff makes its way to the field, sitting next to Dragonite. And I'm opting for Fluttermane and King Gambit one more time. This time we're gonna Terra Grass the Fluttermane. We're expecting a Sleep Powder somewhere. Gonna scout it out with Protect. They go into the Fluttermane with the Sleep Powder. I'm immune to it. Expected the low kick here, so we were able to protect against it successfully as we set up the Trick Room one more time with the Fluttermane. Gonna reserve our King Gambit in favor of Serena, expecting the Sleep Powder going into that slot here. 2 Grass Mons on the field, able to resist that. Another Dazzling Gleam comes out, doing a hefty chunk of damage to Iron Bundle as it comes out. Sleep Powder doesn't work, of course. Switching back into the King Gambit to set it up for these following turns as Dazzling Gleam takes out the Iron Bundle and puts Jumpluff below 50% health. Palm Puff comes out trying to attack it and put some damage on the Serena, but finds King Gambit instead, who resists it. Still a couple of turns of Trick Room left. Primeape's going to Terra into water. We're expecting a Terra there, so we go for a Kowtow Cleave to get some neutral damage before it does get a chance to bulk up here. Another Dazzling Gleam. Going to put Jumpluff low, take a chunk off of Primeape here. Sleep Powder goes into the King Gambit, but we prepped with the Lumberry and was able to hide it successfully, wasting another turn of Jumpluff's time. One more turn of Trick Room here. Primeape goes for the Drain Punch. Couldn't predict where that was going to go to, but goes into the Fluttermane here. We use one more Dazzling Gleam, bring Primeape back down into a pretty low range while taking care of the Jumpluff as the Trick Room goes down. This is where it gets tricky and I have to make my decisions very carefully. Going into the Serena, making sure that Extreme Speed doesn't take out the Fluttermane thanks to that Queenly Majesty. But they go for the Ice Spinner instead. They find the Yachi Berry, which is another little tricky point that I had going Terra Grass Yachi Berry, but I'm at too low of health to survive the Choice Band Ice Spinner anyway. Now, Pikachu with the Fake Out, we know it has multi-scale based on the damage we did previously to it. So we're able to make it flinch, get a Play Rough off, do some hefty damage to it, get a Nuzzle down, making sure that Serena can go ahead of it this following turn and clean it up with a Play Rough. Close out game number 2. Did make a couple of mistakes in that game, but we were able to stifle Purplepiglis' efforts here in order to squeak out a win and moves on to a game number 3. Proud to say that I'm the only one that lost and didn't get 2-0'd here. Spoiler alert. So Gyarados and Iron Bundle coming out this time. This time I'm using Pikachu and Fluttermane. Almost wish I had gone with the King Gambit Fluttermane that I've been planning with the entire time here. Expecting a Fake Out, go with the Double Protect here. And questionably, I Trick Room here. I was kind of evaluating the decision, but decided to go with it. Iron Bundle exits the field. I'm going to save it for later once the Trick Room is over in favor of the Primeape here. Goes with the Iron Head Terra Steel into the Fluttermane. Doesn't KO it because I am insanely bulky, but crucially, I get flinched here. So no extra damage on the board, which I very much needed here. I'm feeling I have to force the Terra on the Pikachu because I don't really have anything in the back that's really benefiting right now from reserving that Terra, and I try and get some extra damage on the board onto the Primeape before it starts getting some extra damage on the board with this Drain Punch here, which it does, recovers most of that damage and brings Pikachu down to Sash level. High jump kick from Serena, just like that last game versus the Dragon Knight. Not enough to KO the Gyarados, unfortunately. Brings it down low and activates its Citrus Berry, making it harder to KO. Gonna go into King Gambit, expecting trying to call out a Drain Punch here. Switch into the Flutter Mane to kind of waste the time, but we get a switch out into Dragonite and another bulk up from the Primeape, who is even slower under Trick Room thanks to that paralysis. All right, Flutter Mane on life alert. Serena escaping into the King Gambit as the Primeape protects, trying to scout out what I'm going to do here. Dazzling Gleam is going to break the multi-scale, but it leaves it exposed to the Dragonite, who does target it down with the Ice Spinner. And it's still at pretty high health right now, making it very difficult to try and do some damage here. Gonna go ahead and protect the Serena, expecting the Ice Spinner here, but it does leave me open to the Drain Punch from Primeape, so I'm just gonna go ahead and eat it and see if I can squeak out a win with the Play Rough and perhaps some paralysis later on. But right now I want to set up the Serena for success by getting some damage into the Dragonite, but Ice Spinner from Choice Band is too strong for me to survive, and Purplepiglis, I would say convincingly, wins this final game here and moves on into the semifinals. Congrats to them. And with that, we do have our 4 semifinalists prepped and ready to go for this week. So as soon as those replays come through, we can do another video like this, just going over the matchup analysis and the replays here. Also really cool that there's still an even amount of representatives from both groups 1 and 2 here. So we'll see if that trend continues as we move on into the finals. So keep an eye out for that. I'll keep you posted, and I will see you next time. Take care.